I'll start this review by saying I don't think I'm a very good person to review this book, and I kind of feel a little bit like I stole it from IVP Press for taking a review copy of this book, but here we are. I'm reviewing a new 2025 release by IVP Press written by Jeffrey Barbeau called The Last Romantic: C.S. Lewis, English Literature, and Modern Theology. And as one might guess from the title, Barbeau presents the idea that C.S. Lewis is the last of the British Romantic writers. And why am I just about the worst person to review this book? I know almost nothing about British Romantic literature. In fact, I needed to Google British Romantic literature after starting this book to get more of a framework of what Barbeau and his contributors were writing about. You see, in my view, British Romantic literature were people writing poems and autobiographies about nature and about their own emotions. And I don't like poetry. I prefer theology to subjective emotions, and so I don't have any care to read the British Romantics. And in hindsight, I even wonder, why did I ask for a review copy of this book? Oh wait, I do know I asked for a review copy of this. First, I really love some of C.S. Lewis's books. The Problem of Pain, The Great Divorce, Experiments in Criticism are some of my favorites. Second, the cover of this book is excellent. The work done by the IVP design team was so good that when I saw the cover, I thought, I want that book on my bookshelf. A reminder to publishers from the small to the large that at times the quality of the cover can be what pushes someone over the edge to purchase a book or hold them back from putting down their hard-earned money to buy it. So please invest time in a quality look for your book. But I'm going to say it again. I don't think I'm a good person to review a book on if C.S. Lewis should be seen as the last romantic. So instead, my review will come from the perspective of, if you like C.S. Lewis's other writings and could care less about classic romantic works, should you pick this one up? I give it a hesitant yes. And if you want to know why, stay with me for just a few more minutes. Welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books about theology and practical living, please subscribe to the channel in order to stay up to date with my latest book reviews. Also, please like and share this video to let others know about the work of C.S. Lewis. The Last Romantic looks at the idea of Lewis being the last British Romantic author from three different perspectives. The first is more of a theological look, as Lewis often tackled religious and theological issues from a more personal, some would say subjective experience perspective that would be more at home in British Romanticism than in traditional theological works. Barbeau wrote on how even though Lewis used the personal and the relatable and often talked down upon his own ability to write in the theological world, Lewis was far more adept than one might have thought when it comes to his writings. In very subtle ways, he brought out very deep theology, which is what made him such an effective communicator. Where this book really shines is in Barbeau's examination of Lewis's personal library that is held currently at the Marion E. Wade Center. Now, you might think, would it really be all that helpful to see Lewis's own collections of his books? And I would say it turns out, yes, it is, because C.S. Lewis often wrote and made notes in books while he was reading them. There's even an image in the book from C.S. Lewis's own copy of The Friend by S.T. Coleridge, where Lewis created his own index for the book in the back of his copy. So Lewis made many notes, many connections that the average reader like myself would miss while reading. And through these notes, Barbeau is able to pull out a lot of insight into what Lewis is thinking to show that this was a man who truly was a deep theologian, but he had an ability to take his theology and connect it to the daily and the personal, something that some might view as subjective, and in a lot of ways you could say it is subjective, because no one can really know what's going on in you but you. No one can know what Sean Wilson is feeling but me. And it was the ability for Lewis to combine modern theology with Romanticism that allowed his audience to take more difficult concepts of theology and bring them to heart, or to truly understand what they mean, which is why his descriptions of Christianity in Mere Christianity, or his defense of God and the problem of pain, connect with a broader audience far better than the vast majority of religious authors. I felt like while reading chapter 1 that I was getting this wonderful glimpse into how Lewis took these two often seen as opposing worlds, modern theology and classic Romanticism, but then put them together in a unique way, and that is what ends up making his work so timeless and down to earth. The second chapter looks at Lewis's famed autobiographical works and connected them to, and I did not see this coming, but the autobiographical works of Methodists. Now, I expected a book on Lewis to connect with his Anglican views, but Barbeau demonstrates how impactful the Romantic biographies were on Lewis, and how those biographies were very often tied to the biographies found in Methodism. So Barbeau writes on how in A Grief Observed, Lewis really picked up the Methodist practice of journal writing and used that style to present his thoughts on grief. In fact, his copy of John Wesley's journal indicates that he was reading Wesley's journal at the same time that he was writing A Grief Observed. So Lewis's autobiographical work didn't just simply come out of nowhere or simply a desire for Lewis to write about himself, but Lewis was very purposefully using that specific style of writing in order to communicate the thoughts and principles that he desired to bring home to his audience. And the final chapter looked at C.S. Lewis and the sacraments. And this chapter was my favorite, and I think it might have a lasting impact on maybe not how I view the Lord's Supper, but how I teach it and bring it home to others, and the purpose of the Lord's Supper. Lewis used many images and stories in his books to communicate to people about the physical and the tangible world using those images. It was a romantic idea, at least I think it was, to look at the grand around you in nature, or maybe even the minutia of nature, to gaze upon it and to be transported by the physical that is surrounding you and bringing that to a sublime joy on the inside. And Barbeau writes in the last chapter on how the wardrobe, that is the inspiration for the wardrobe, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is held in the Marion E. Wade Center. And how one thing he enjoys is watching others gaze upon that wardrobe, knowing that through their imagination, they aren't looking at a simple wooden closet for coats, but they are looking at a doorway into a fantastical world where Santa Claus is real, beavers talk, and a white witch has fallen because of the sacrifice of a lion. But the thing is, that wardrobe isn't a doorway into Narnia, and no one looking at it thinks that it is. But the physical nature of that wardrobe aids in your imagination to allow it to run wild with the stories of Narnia as you gaze upon it and imagine that if you walked in there, you might enter those wintry woods, or those same woods turned over to spring. And this is a wonderful illustration of what the Lord's Supper is intended to do for us. We eat the bread and we drink the cup, not because Jesus physically comes into the room and climbs back on the cross for us, but because as we eat the bread and as we drink the cup, we have this physical, tangible reminder to aid in our thinking and our imagination to remember and to be thankful for what Christ has done for us. So he writes on how we aren't to spend our time arguing over the nature of the bread and wine any more than seeing that it would be pointless to argue over the type of wood that was used to make the Lewis family wardrobe. The point isn't to dwell on the wardrobe itself, but to imagine the world of imagination where the wardrobe can take you. And the point when it comes to the Lord's Supper isn't to argue over wine versus grape juice, leavened bread versus unleavened bread, or I would even say memorial versus real presence. Now, I have strong views on all those debates, but those debates take us away from the purpose of the Lord's Supper, which is to get our sanctified imagination set in gear to be able to picture and remember and proclaim the death of Jesus Christ. And I found this chapter to be a wonderful illustration for the purpose of baptism and the Lord's Supper. Now, to wrap up this review, I want to say I'm glad to have read this book. I think it gave me some more insight into the thinking of C.S. Lewis. But I also want to say that if someone knows and they're familiar with British Romantic literature, I'm going to guess you'll get way more out of this book. But I got to say, even if you aren't, if you're just a fan of C.S. Lewis, there's some really great stuff inside.